Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by Khaki. What's new and exciting in your world this week?
Well, I found something really disturbing. A study by, I shouldn't say study, it was more like a poll, Empower Investments, asked Americans, what is your time worth? When economists ask questions like this, they never rely on someone's response, what's your time worth, and you say some number. Rather, we go by what's called revealed preferences. We observe, what do you sell your time for? And by definition, that's what your time is worth. But here, Empower did the opposite. They asked, what do you think your time is worth? And the answers are just astounding. Now, before I give you the numbers, let me give you some perspective. The Fed has figures on usual weekly earnings. And so what this is, take all full-time workers, take the guy in the middle, and ask the guy in the middle how much you're earning. So we're talking about full-time workers only. On an hourly basis, $28 an hour, that translates to $60,000 a year. That's not households, that's individuals.
That seems exactly right to me.
Yeah, and so if an economist were to say, well, what is your time worth? They'd look at that number because that's what you actually are willing to sell your time for, $28 an hour. Now, along comes this survey, and they broke it down by generation, which is fascinating. The average boomer says his or her time is worth $137 an hour.
Touch optimistic.
Yeah, which comes out to be the equivalent of $285,000 a year.
I'm remembering back to my time in a classroom when I would ask freshmen who were not boomers what they expected to make in their first year after college.
Right.
And I'm guessing that what's about to come out of your mouth is even more ridiculous than what just did come out.
Oh, it is. I'm just going to go by generation here. So boomers believe their time is worth $137 an hour. Gen X, they believe their time's worth $216 an hour, or $450,000 a year. Millennials believe their time is worth, hold on to your hats, $329 an hour, or $680,000 a year.
Who do they think is going to pay them that? And what do they think they're going to do in order to get that?
Well, 684K, I'm pretty sure that's the cutoff for the 1%. So you ask the average millennial, the average, right? This is not like the top, but this is the average millennial believes his time is worth the same as someone in the 1%. Then we come to Gen Z. Now, you can look at this two ways. One way is, Gen Z complains that their lives aren't as good as those of the generations before them. And indeed, they believe their time is only worth $262 an hour versus the $329 for millennials.
Gen Z is actually becoming more reasonable.
Except there's this strangeness of, again, let's go back to this off-stated belief that the current young generation has it worse off than older generations. And yet, if you ask them what is their time worth, they believe their time is worth twice as much as boomers believe their time is worth.
And the boomers are incredibly optimistic to begin with.
Yeah, everybody here is off by a factor of 10.
Yeah, that's right. And look, you and I, at least I am Gen X. Are you a boomer or are you Gen X?
I'm Gen X.
I'm a little ashamed of my generation for what it apparently believes, because that's ridiculous.
Again, come back to this idea of revealed preference. Someone can hear this and say, "What? No, my time really is worth this much. The problem is I can't find an employer willing to pay that." Yeah, but here's the thing. You can't find an employer willing to pay that, but you did find an employer willing to pay $28 an hour. And the question is, did you say yes? And if you said yes, then your time is worth, you just declared that your time is worth $28 an hour. Would you like to get more? Of course you would. Everybody would like to get more. But you didn't say no. Therefore, your time is worth $28 an hour.
That would be like my saying something like, well, I really want $3.2 million an hour. Therefore, my time is worth $3.2 million an hour.
Right.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
That's just asinine, right? And any rational person would know it. I guess I tipped my hand when I said any rational person. There goes your problem. And look, man, I remember the last class I taught a few years back at the University of Arizona. It's a state school, and you're dealing with people who are going to get what I would call regular jobs when they start their regular lives. And I remember one day asking in a freshman class what the students thought their first year's salary would be. And the first kid's hand up was $250,000 a year.
Oh, incredible. Incredible. He's going to start at $250,000.
And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, Pumpkin, you haven't experienced reality in any way."
Yeah.
I mean, literally in no way at all have you put your toe in the reality pool. Mm-hmm. Because even in Arizona, where, look, wages are high because our minimum wage is quite high here. It's like 14 and something dollars. And that has the net effect of pushing all wages up to some degree or another. You've got an odds-on chance of walking out of your college life and making $20-25 an hour. And that's $40,000, $45,000, $50,000 a year. Mm-hmm. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good. You're at roughly the median. Well, 60 is the median.
Anyway, Ant, how could we make this even sillier? And I think the only way to do it would be to go from economics to politics. And you might recall that we've got an election coming up. Do you pay any attention to this?
Yeah, I am. And I'm sorry to say I see on the two sides one guy who appears to be losing his mind and the other guy who appears to be a felon or soon to be felon, depending on how his next case goes.
Careful there, because I thought your analysis was going to break in the other direction. I thought you were talking about Donald Trump when you said a man losing his mind, because I think Joe Biden has already lost his mind.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah.
And Donald Trump, I think, is in the process of losing it. There's a new story every day about how out of touch both of these guys are. And, I think the American people are seeing it because we've got a new poll. And this one's actually more of a real poll than that nonsense you just talked about a minute ago. Because we're looking at the share of Americans who say they have unfavorable views of both candidates.
Of both. Okay. Let me guess. I would guess.
Please.
40%.
Yeah, I knew you were going to overestimate this. No, it's 25. But that's the absolute highest it's ever been.
Huh.
And you have to think about that for a minute. Why on earth would that be the highest it's ever been? Well, the word both does a lot of the lifting here. Mm-hmm. Think about the true believers on either side who can't fathom that their candidate is a complete and total jackass. And both of these guys are complete and total jackasses. But the Republicans and the Democrats will never say that about their respective candidates.
Right.
So the word both here lifts a lot of weight. 25% of the American people, and I am one of them, I assume you're one of them, I assume 80% of our listeners fall into this category. 25% of the American people have no use for either one of these people. And that number is going to get higher as we get closer to the election and people pay more attention. Imagine what that number is going to look like after the first debate.
Yeah. What's got me worried, and I was thinking about this just today as I was watching some of the video of Biden at the, whatever it was, the anniversary of the landing on Normandy. What's got me worried is there may be a growing number of voters who just think it's funny. Let's vote for the felon just to see what it's like to have a president who's a felon. Or let's vote for the guy who's lost his mind because it'd just be interesting to see.
I suspect there are people like that. I suspect there aren't that many. I suspect they cancel out.
I don't know. I mean, to be someone like that, you have to not take any of this seriously. But I don't know how many people have been taking our elections seriously for a number of decades.
Well, you and I talked last week, I guess it was, about the possibility of maybe implementing some sort of quiz before you're allowed to vote. And the more I've thought about that over the past week, the more I think that's not a bad idea. And we'll continue right on. But of course, Ant, that brings us to the foolishness of the week. And there were a number of candidates this week. Something that came in at what I thought was a close second. Laura Trump, that gift that keeps right on giving, is out there complaining now that the Republican Party is going to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law people who violate campaign law. Well, here we go. What she's really doing is saying this election is about to be stolen too, and when you try to do it again, even though there is literally not one speck of evidence that this is a problem.
There are a number of people, and a few of them amongst our listeners, who say, no, indeed, there is evidence. And yet there have been multiple court cases where the courts have said, okay, bring me your evidence. And nothing has shown up. All you hear is in the news, the repetition of, well, yes, of course there's evidence.
And this came to bite Dinesh D'Souza last week, and he has become such a caricature of what he once was. You know, this 2000 Mules movie that he made about people that were walking around with big stacks of Joe Biden absentee ballots and they're dropping them in and the court said, all right, the book is out. You've made the assertion. Let's hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of providing the evidence, he and the distribution company apologized and took the book off the market.
Oh, wow. I didn't see any of that.
Right. Let's hear the whining class on the political right explain that.
Wow.
But anyway, that's not the foolishness of the week. Right, which is an awfully long prelude to get to the stupid thing that is the foolishness of the week. And I'm a little surprised you weren't talking about this from the minute you logged on today. But we're back to Donald Trump and his participation in reality. He opined, and it's not a policy proposal. It was just one of those things that Donald Trump says because he can't stop saying things. He opined that we're going to get rid of the income tax, which, hey, man, I'm all on board with that. Let's get rid of the income tax. But how are we going to do it? A big, gigantic tariff.
Yeah. I did see that. I'd forgotten it because I ran the numbers, and the tariff, of course, would be on imports.
Before you get going with the numbers, I just have to say, this is the dumbest thing I've heard in years.
Yeah.
And we'll get into why. But go ahead, lay out the reality of the numbers before we even get into how bad this really is.
And this is the income tax. So roughly speaking, the federal government collects about $3 trillion. That's just the income tax. It collects a total of $5 trillion from all sources. But $3 trillion from the income tax. Imports are about $3 trillion. So you'd have to impose a 100% tariff on every single item that comes into the country. That's assuming that people keep on importing at the same rate that they were.
Which, of course, they wouldn't.
Right, yeah.
Because nobody is buying the same they buy when it costs 100% more every single time. Literally everything you buy would have to cost 100% more, twice as much.
Yeah, so you may be in a situation where it's simply impossible that you cannot levy a high enough tariff, given your imports, to raise the money that you're looking for.
Right, it just wouldn't work. But it gets a little worse than that, because if you sit back and ask, who's cheering the loudest for this? Who heard this and said, you know, that's a great idea? Well, it's Trump's typical supporters. And here's the thing. Trump's typical supporters aren't paying income taxes already. How do I know this? 60% of the American people are not paying income taxes.
Yeah.
We have covered this time and time again, and the minute it comes out of my mouth, the hate mail comes rolling in, because every person in the country looks at his paycheck, sees the withholding, and says, see, I do pay income tax. Well, no, sugar, no, you don't. Tell them why they don't.
Again, talking about the average lower income person, you get more than that back when you file your taxes at the end. And you don't realize it because it's hidden amongst things. It's credits and earned income tax credit and what have you, that you end up getting back more than you paid in. And we're talking about income tax here, not the payroll tax, Social Security, Medicare. That's a separate thing. In a strange way, the people who are applauding the demise of the income tax, they aren't paying it. So all they would end up with is paying twice as much for everything that they purchase that comes in from foreign countries.
Which by the time you start doing the actual math, they would be paying multiple times what they think they would be paying.
Right, yeah.
You can't say they'd be paying multiple times what they're already paying because they're already paying less than zero.
Yeah.
So that multiplication doesn't actually work. I'm bad at math, and even I know that. And here we sit. Now, 60% of the American people do not pay. 60% are net recipients.
You call this the foolishness and you lead with Trump. And I have to say it is foolish, but I don't think he's the foolishness. I think it's the voters that are the foolishness. Trump is brilliant.
No, he's not, because he doesn't know the math that we just laid out in 3 easy minutes.
Oh, I would say he doesn't care. He's just saying words that are going to bring along votes.
No, he actually believes that tariffs solve problems. He has demonstrated this for years.
If he does win, maybe he'll balance the budget or pay off the debt this time.
Well, he did say he was going to do it in 8 years, and in 4 years, but didn't he add fully 1/3
right.
to the debt?
Not only did he not pay it off, he increased it substantially.
So he was off to a rollicking start on his 8-year plan. Joe Biden hasn't done much better, because why would he? And this year, we did hear Republican candidates utter the word debt in the Republican debates. I think only because Nikki Haley insisted that they say it.
Yeah.
And now that she's long gone and licking Trump's boots the way that she claimed she never would, well, I guess we're finished with that now.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers. We're here this week with Jason Smith. Jason Smith owns a company. He designs and sells board games. But before we get to that, the reason we got here is Jason's been a listener of Words and Numbers and joined Words and Numbers Backstage, the group on Facebook, where we have all sorts of interesting conversations about various things. And somebody raised a question. I even forget now what the question was, but raised a question about board gaming. And you jumped in and answered saying, I, actually started a company and I do this thing, and answered whatever the question was. And it fascinated me because I've always had an interest in board games, both when I was a kid designing them and then playing them, and then computer games come along. And of course I'm playing those, but I never lost my love for board games in addition to computer games, because there's an interesting interaction that you get with people that you're playing with that you just can't simulate, even when you're playing multiplayer computer games. So anyway, we wanted to have you on and talk about your experience with gaming.
Well, yeah, thank you. Absolutely. In the board game sector, we've seen a growth of about 400% in board game sales, and a similar increase in the number of board games on the market in about the last 10 years or so. Some of that's been fueled by millennials growing older and kind of getting bad eyesight like myself and can't really play video games. And some of that's been driven by the pandemic too, and kind of that desire for people to come sit together and play a game with each other face to face instead of over the computer. Just to kind of give you a real quick intro, I've got a couple degrees in econ and political science. I was in a PhD program at Florida State, ended up leaving early with a couple of master's degrees. I moved to Jacksonville, Florida to work for a major healthcare provider here. I met a guy named Dwight Senack. Dwight had started this game called High Noon, and he was kind of in the late beta testing of the starter pack of the game when I came along. And so I was initially kind of invited in just to be a beta tester for the game. Found that it was a very good game. Dwight had done an extremely good job creating a very vivid universe and had a pretty solid foundation to the game, but he needed a little bit of balancing. And that's kind of where the economics side of me kind of really took off. It was this idea of like forcing trade-offs in the game to make the game more interesting.
That part of your background also matches with mine. I ran across game theory as a graduate student, never heard of it before, absolutely fell in love with it, and ended up teaching it then as a professor. This was after my days of designing games, and so I never had the opportunity to employ game theory in actually building a game. And I'm sure it gave you all kinds of interesting insights that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Oh, yeah, it's similar here. I came to game theory, kind of worked on my first master's degree at the University of Louisville. Ended up starting into the PhD program at Florida State. Got involved with actually doing game theory work for the Pentagon, for like war gaming and predicting political collapses. My master's thesis was very heavy into like the resource curse literature and how countries can use oil to either stabilize or destabilize the government. You kind of take that same math and that same theory works quite well transferring over to board games. But one of the things we were looking to do, we're a Western-themed board game, Cowboys and Indians type thing. We're wanting to kind of force players to make choices and to take risks. We have different factions in the game. Some factions are very heavy into offense. Some are very heavy into defense. They have loot crates that they can loot, so you can kind of help balance your player out. There are 3 different types of loot. One's kind of healing potions, one's gear, and one's a weapons type crate. So if you have one of those players that's very heavy on defense, you want to try to get to a weapons crate to try to get a more powerful weapon to kind of level yourself up and balance yourself out. But there's always choices you have to make. In each round, you can only take one action. So you can only loot a crate or attack a player. So you kind of have to make that decision. Do I want to power up my attack for next time, or do I want to try to earn victory points right now?
Right. So the same kind of trade-off. Yeah, people make in the real world with real things all the time.
Exactly. Right now, I'm currently on the job market looking for a new job and doing the same thing. Do I give up the position I have now? I'm pretty stable in the company I'm at, but I'd like to make more money and to make an advancement up. And there's a risk going out in the job market looking for something like that. But it's like you've got to make those choices everywhere.
Now, the game you're describing, this is your company, correct me if I'm wrong, your company has the same name as the game. That's High Noon?
Correct. We actually have 2 companies. High Noon Game is an LLC. We're divided up in A shares and B shares. Dwight Cenac, the guy who actually founded the company, his father and I own the A shares. And then we've got some B shares that we put out to venture capitalists. I know that question of how funding works kind of came up. We also have another company that we're starting. It's actually going to be a publishing house. We think it's probably going to be called Simplicity, but we're still kind of working on the name. But the idea with that company is to use our experience to kind of help new people into the gaming sphere get their own games published.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating to me. I've been almost down that path on the electronic gaming side. It's not as fun, but more, how should I say, it's more lucrative if you're aiding other people in publishing their games. Let's go back to High Noon for a minute. This is a Cowboys and Indians game set in the Midwest 1800s, I assume.
We kind of operate in like what we would call an alternative time period. So it's kind of like post-Civil War to Spanish-American War. So kind of late 1800s, early 1900s.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand you correctly from your comments on Backstage, you got pushback simply because you had American Indians in the game?
Yeah, it was very interesting. The board game space is it's a very large space. And there's a minority group in there that is very left-wing kind of woke politics. Unfortunately, they're in a lot of the serious kind of gatekeeper positions. One of the things we were trying to do is we're kind of expecting to have pushback, but we felt like we needed to include Native Americans because historically they were there. And so we were trying to come at this from a very respectful side. Kind of the backstory to the game, the Native Americans are actually kind of the good guys. Their rival faction, the kind of ex-Civil War soldiers, are kind of the bloodthirsty bad guys. But we still got quite a bit of pushback from some of the influencers.
But why?
A lot of them just objected to the entire idea of having a Native American in there without having a Native American designer on board.
I see. Okay.
I have an adopted cousin that's actually half Cherokee. I actually ran some of the ideas by him. He talked with some of his friends in the Cherokee idea, and they all felt like it was a very respectfully done design. And we got some really positive feedback from them. One of them was actually happy that we were the only Western-themed board game currently on the market that I know of that actually has a Native American faction. And he brought the game simply for that reason.
But that's not enough to satisfy your critics.
Oh, not the serious critics, no. We sent out an advanced copy of the game, And one of the influencers even refused to actually play with Native American factions. She would only play
Oh
with
my
the other three
God.
factions in the game.
What does it mean then for your game? To what extent have you, has it shut doors that you can't get it onto market in certain places?
The biggest thing, there are two board game conventions in the US, Gen Con and Origins. We are actually banned from presenting at Origins.
Or you're banned from the entire, what is it, what do you call it, a conference, a trade show?
It's more a convention and conference with a little bit of a trade show element.
And you've been banned simply because you have Native Americans in your game?
Primarily, yeah, basically.
Well, of course, that has some impact on your business. Is this a huge impact, small impact, what?
Oh, it's a pretty big impact. There's a group called GAMA, Game Manufacturers of America. Dwight's had some talks with GAMA. I'm not really sure what's kind of gone on with them about that. But our relationship with GAMA is okay for the most part. But Origins is kind of part of GAMA, but separately run. So to make that as confused as possible. So we are making some inroads there. And I think there's a chance that we'll probably be back at Origins soon. The biggest problem we've had, we're not banned from Gen Con. Gen Con just has an extremely long waiting list to get in. So that the gatekeeping there is just more the fact that nobody ever gives up space. So you end up on a waiting list that just kind of perpetually keeps rolling over and over. Yeah, so in the U.S., we pretty much have been doing more kind of regional and local conventions here.
What's the channel that gets you into the hands of consumers? When I was a kid, I used to love Avalon Hill games, and I could go into, I shouldn't say any, but many stores. They weren't even dedicated gaming stores. In fact, I don't even know if there were dedicated gaming stores back then, but you walk in and they would have some Avalon Hill games there. I don't know, apart from the occasional time when I do wander into an actual gaming store, not electronic gaming, but gaming, in major stores, I don't think I've seen a game apart from, the obvious Monopoly in decades. How do you get into the hands of consumers?
The model of that has changed dramatically. I'm a huge Access and Allies myself, and you used to be able to walk into Walmart and buy it. But that's not really the model anymore. Walmart and Target kind of stick more to your classic Monopoly type games, and they don't really take a risk on some of these more serious games. So you kind of think of the industry as being like traditional board games, and then like your more serious games like Warhammer 40K. You tend to refer to those more as like tabletop games. And what High Noon is we're kind of in between. The starter set, it's a little bit more serious than a board game, but it's not a full-on like tabletop game. But with the expansions, you can kind of turn it into more of a tabletop type. So we kind of focus the starter set on like the families. And then when you bring in the more complicated mechanics with the expansions, that's where we kind of get the seriousness involved. And what you're seeing now is that most of those games are actually sold through independent game stores. It's rare that you'll find somebody that owns maybe more than 2 or 3 of these locations in a city. Most of these guys have 1, maybe 2 stores. So you've got to kind of got to get these guys on board. And there's a couple of channels to do that. Big one, of course, are a lot of these conventions. The online sites like Board Game Geek and influencers, that's kind of another way to reach out through to these independent game stores and get sold there. Yeah, so obviously, like kind of being shut out of Origins kind of closes a lot of those pathways down.
When I was in graduate school, we did a lot of gaming. Of course, graduate school's a magnet for nerds, so that's where you're going to find more gamers than you find in the general population. My buddies and I would get together every Friday night and play whatever. That's where I first encountered Steve Jackson games. You know Steve Jackson?
I know of him, yeah.
It got to the point that it's like your favorite author. Anything he produced, I wanted to get hold of. What was the case back then is rather than investing in the full the board game with the box and all of that stuff, Steve Jackson would sell miniature versions in this little like paperback book size plastic shell and little miniature pieces. In fact, it was kind of the joke that, if you had to laugh when you're playing, you've got to turn your head because the breath coming out of you would just blow all the pieces all over the board, right? But little tiny things. It gave you the opportunity for, half price or less to try out the game. And if you like it, then you go buy the larger version.
We're on Tabletop Simulator. So we have the base version game on there. So you can try it and play it on there for free.
Now, hang on. I don't know what that is. Tabletop Simulator?
Yeah, it's basically a computer program that you can upload your board games to. And so you can play board games online that way.
Wow! I had no idea. That is so cool.
We only have the starter set up there. Obviously, wouldn't drive sales. It's to get people kind of hooked on the game. We used it a lot early on in the beta test. It was extremely handy because board gaming is huge in Europe. And we were able to tap into a very strong beta testing network in the Netherlands and Germany with that.
That's astounding. I'm still, you've rocked my world here with this. I had no idea such a thing existed.
Yeah, it was during our Kickstarter too. That question come up on the board as well.
Yeah, you got to tell us about your Kickstarter.
We initially launched a Kickstarter in March of 2020. And of course, we didn't have the game manufactured. We kind of got into this because my Dwight, who founded the company, been working in China with importing stuff for about a decade or so. So he had all the contacts with manufacturers over there and whatnot, and made multiple trips over there, getting the best price deals and everything. So we launched the Kickstarter about a week later, COVID, and we sat down and we're like, we have no idea what's going to happen. Obviously, manufacturing in China is a huge question right now. It's kind of like when can we get the game produced if we can't even produce the game in China right now? So we ended up having to pull the initial Kickstarter after about a week. And we told all the backers of the original Kickstarter, we're going to give you a free copy of the base game. We're going to have to sit back and kind of ride this out and figure out what happens. Will China reopen? Are we going to have to move manufacturing to Mexico? What's going to happen? So after about a year, things started kind of clearing up. We launched on Dwight's birthday in March of 2021. By this point, we had already manufactured the starter pack of the game. So we're like, hey, this is a low-risk Kickstarter. We already have the base version of the game out. You're at least going to get something very quickly. Kickstarter ran for about 30 days, ended up making total somewhere around $175,000 on it, which was an extremely strong showing for a first-time Kickstarter. We got into the logistics hassle because we went to ship right into the shipping prices then. Normally shipping out sometime late spring, early summer, we'd be looking at about $1,000, $2,000 per container. I was kind of expecting some supply issues, so we had budgeted out $7,000 per container. Went to our logistics guy in May. They said, we won't even quote you a price for a single. It's not worth it.
And by container, you mean like a shipping container?
Yeah, like a 53-foot shipping container that you see people making homes out of now.
Am I picturing this right? The regular size shipping container filled with copies of your game?
We had about enough to fill up a 53-foot short cube.
How many is that?
It was about 5,000 in the original run.
I would have thought you could fit a heck of a lot more than that in a shipping container.
There was some other stuff. We had some of the additional stuff shipped with that too. The rest of the expansions just came out this last year, actually. But there were some other expansions and stuff in there as well. I think it was June, July. They're like at $42,000 for single container.
Oof.
And by September, it had come down to $21,000. At that point, we're like, we just have to bite the bullet and get this done because we made the promise to get the games out by Christmas time.
And so the game comes out, and what happens? Are there magazines that will review it, get customer feedback?
Yeah, we actually got a short write-up in Forbes magazine.
Really?
One of their guys, it was just a couple paragraphs, but one of their guys got an advanced copy of the game. We were using a point-and-game consulting firm at the time that was able to get us a copy of the board game to him through the New York Toy Show. So we got a short write-up there. We sent out a number of games to a number of influencers, and for the most part, with the exception of a couple of the woke influencers, we got really positive response for this part. We got onto Board Game Geek, and we've got somewhere, I think, around a 7.5, 8 rating on Board Game Geek, which is pretty high rating. So
you've got me interested. I've got to go out and try this game now.
Yeah, definitely.
But tell me, what comes next? Are you planning another one or moving on to something different?
Right now, we just launched our first 8 expansion packs onto the market. Those are manufactured and shipped over at the end of last year. So the Kickstarter backers, most of the Kickstarter backers were able to get theirs by Christmas time. Last year, we went to Germany, to the Essen, which is a huge international trade show and convention. They run Origins and Gen Con have about 100,000 attendees. Spiel Essen's about 200,000 attendees with people from over 53 different countries. We went over there last year. We had a very strong showing there, and we're actually working to get into the European market right now. And Dwight's been negotiating contracts with some distributors over there. Hopefully, we'll be able to be in the European Union, UK, sometime in the near future. Got another, something like another 70 or 80 expansion packs that are somewhere in the work, anywhere from being late beta testing to kind of loose ideas on paper. It's a shame James is here. One of the factions he might be interested in is a politician.
Ah, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, his name's Governor McGrady. And so he's the governor of all the territories in the High Noon universe. Most of the time, how the other factions work is you earn gold. You earn either gold by doing damage, or if you kill a character, you get his bounty on his wanted post, however many gold the character's worth. McGrady works in a different mechanic. What he does is he collects gold each round, and then he tries to distribute the gold for political favors.
Right.
And if he gets so many political favors, if he gets certain political favors done, he gets votes. And if he gets 12 votes before the end of the game, then the game stops and he wins right there.
You're reminding me, when I was a young faculty member, I designed and wrote a game, EcoSim, that I played with. At its height, I had 4 or 5 separate classes all playing the same game together. Principal students would play the roles of companies and consumers, and I had an econometrics class that would actually collect data from the game, produce forecasts, and sell them to the game players. But I was teaching at the time as well public sector econ, and they played the role of the government.
Yeah.
Their goal was to get votes, period. And they said to me, "Do you mean that we could just give away money for votes?" I said, "Sure." But the people who were voting for them were the people in the game. Right? So it was an entirely closed system. And the students absolutely loved it. It was a pain in my butt to program.
Yeah.
So tell me, to what extent do you find that you rely on your formal training in game theory and risk management as opposed to just gut instinct in designing these games?
It's definitely a combination of both. The way the process works, Dwight's the creator, so he, for the most part, kind of creates a faction. I've created a couple myself, but he's created all but about 2 or 3. So he'll come up with kind of the idea, and he'll be like, I've got a machine gun code, and, he's going to have a machine gun. His big thing is going to be able to fire a lot of stuff. And then he'll kind of come up with the basics of it, and he'll throw it to me, and I'll be like, okay, my gut feeling is that he needs to be like high attack, low defense. Mm-hmm. Kind of turn him into like a glass cannon. Easy to shoot, but he can do a lot of damage. And the initial balancing is kind of all of the gut type balancing. Then we'll actually start playing and collecting data. The first time we play, it's usually Dwight and I just going, okay, here's the faction that's probably going to be the best matchup against him and the worst matchup. We'll play 1 versus 1 during those 2 to kind of get a feel of the character. And then we'll do a little bit of adjustments there. Then we'll kind of move on more to beta testing and data collection. And that's where kind of more the formal training.
Yeah.
So I'll let 10 guys play it. I'll see how all 10 of them play it. And then we'll kind of make mathematical adjustments from there.
God, that sounds like so much fun.
It's a lot of fun. It does not feel like work.
Jason, this is great. I really appreciate you sharing your experience. Where can people go to get a copy of your game?
Our website is www.highnoongame.com. You can order anything on there. We've been available on Amazon. We're kind of in the middle of changing distributors right now. So I don't know if it's going to be available on Amazon for the short term, but it will be. If it's not up there right now, it will be back up there in the not too distant future.
That's excellent. Thanks so much for responding to that post on Backstage. Otherwise, we never would have had this conversation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I follow Backstage quite closely, and I don't miss many posts on there, but I saw that one in particular, and I'm like, yeah, I've got to jump on there.
And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.